No, it was 2:47 in the morning, and a single man in a single room pressed send. In that instant, one gesture, one breath, one fraction of a second, the most powerful military alliance in human history found itself staring into an abyss it had never imagined possible. This is not the story cable news told you. They called it a diplomatic flare-up, a negotiating tactic. Some called it a mistake, an impulsive post from a leader who, they said, simply couldn't resist the provocation. They were wrong. What happened on the night of January 18, 2026, and in the 72 hours that followed, was the most precise, the most calculated, and the most consequential act of economic warfare a sitting American president has ever unleashed against allies. Not adversaries, not rivals, allies. And to understand why, to truly understand what happened that night, you have to go back further, much further, to a frozen island in the North Atlantic, to a question that has haunted American strategists for decades, and to a man who never forgot an answer he was refused. Greenland is not just ice. That is the single most important thing most Americans do not understand about this crisis. For generations, Greenland has been dismissed, a remote, frozen territory. Beautiful, perhaps, if you were the adventurous type, but strategically irrelevant to the average citizen's life. A place that appeared on maps, but never on the evening news. That changed. Over the past decade, as Arctic ice retreated at an accelerating pace, something extraordinary emerged. New shipping lanes opened, access to rare minerals critical to defense systems and next-generation technology became possible. And, most importantly for military strategists, Greenland offered a front-row seat to the Arctic, a theater of operations that Russia and China had been quietly preparing to dominate. Greenland sits at the top of the world. It controls access to the North Atlantic shipping corridor. It hosts Patuxent Space Base, one of the most strategically vital military installations on the planet, a base that provides early warning detection for intercontinental ballistic missiles aimed at the United States. And it belongs to Denmark, a NATO ally with a population smaller than the city of Philadelphia. American military planners had been raising the alarm for years. If Russia or China gained even a foothold in Greenland, the balance of power in the Arctic would shift overnight. Donald Trump understood this. He had understood it since his first term in office, when he first floated the idea of purchasing Greenland outright. The suggestion was dismissed at the time, ridiculed by pundits, forgotten by the news cycle within a week. It was not forgotten by him. When Trump entered his second term in January 2025, Greenland was back on the map, both literally and figuratively. By the first weeks of 2026, the rhetoric had escalated beyond anything the diplomatic community had ever encountered from a sitting American president. Trump posted repeatedly on Truth Social. The language was not diplomatic, it was not measured, it was a demand. China and Russia want Greenland, and there is not a thing that Denmark can do about it. Only the United States of America, under President Donald J. Trump, can defend Greenland. Denmark's response was clear. Greenland is not for sale. Its sovereignty is not up for discussion. Greenland's Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, was direct. Sovereignty, he declared, was a red line, not negotiable, not by Washington, not by anyone. But Trump refused to accept that answer. And when a man commanding the economic might of a $27 trillion economy refuses to accept an answer, the question stops being diplomatic. It becomes something else entirely. The trigger came on January 16th. Several European NATO members began deploying small military contingents to Greenland as part of Operation Arctic Endurance, a series of Danish-led training exercises planned through NATO channels, coordinated, routine, ordinary by every standard definition. Trump did not see them as ordinary. He saw them as a provocation. Within hours, he posted on Truth Social. The language was not diplomatic, it was not measured, it was a demand. NATO, tell Denmark to get them out of here now. He mocked the Danish defense forces guarding Greenland, falsely claiming they consisted of nothing more than 2 dog sleds. The tone was unmistakable. The message required no interpretation. These soldiers, from allied nations, participating in legitimate military exercises on sovereign Danish territory, were not welcome. And then Trump escalated further. In a message he asked to be shared with world leaders directly, he made a statement that stopped diplomatic analysts in their tracks. He said he no longer felt an obligation to think purely of peace. The reason he offered was stunning in its candor. He had not been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It was not a statement of foreign policy. It was a window, a rare, unfiltered window, into the calculation happening inside the White House. Peace was conditional. Cooperation was conditional. The alliance itself was conditional. Everything, it turned out, was conditional. And so, on Saturday, January 18th, the condition was stated plainly. The post went up on Truth Social. It was short, it was specific, and by any historical measure, it was unprecedented. 8 countries would face new tariffs, 10% starting February 1st, rising to 25% by June 1st, not because of trade imbalances, not because of unfair labor practices or currency manipulation, or any of the traditional grievances that have triggered tariffs throughout economic history, because they had sent troops, a handful of soldiers, to a territory that Trump wanted to control. The list read like a roll call of America's oldest and most trusted allies: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Finland. 8 democracies, 8 nations bound by mutual defense agreements that had held for decades. 8 countries whose armed forces had fought alongside American troops in conflicts stretching from the beaches of Normandy to the mountains of Afghanistan. Threatened with economic punishment for doing exactly what NATO members are supposed to do: support each other's security. The message needed no diplomatic translation, no analysis from think tanks or foreign policy journals. Support my objective or pay the price. But here is where the story becomes more than a tariff dispute. Here is where it becomes something genuinely historic. The headline number was the trade volume. Approximately $1.5 to $2 trillion flows annually between the United States and its European allies. An enormous figure, millions of jobs, thousands of businesses, decades of economic cooperation. But that number is only the surface. The United States economy, the $27 trillion engine that backs every dollar, every bond, every financial instrument the world trades in, was now being used as a weapon, not against China, not against Russia, against the nations that had helped build the post-war economic order in the first place. The real stakes were not measured in annual trade volumes. They were measured in the structural integrity of Western finance itself. The bond markets, the currency agreements, the investment flows that move billions across borders every day, the supply chains that keep economies breathing. The reaction was immediate, and it was seismic. Within hours, the 8 targeted nations released a joint statement. The tariff threats, they wrote, undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. They pledged to stand united and coordinated. But words do not move bond markets. On Monday, global exchanges opened with investors scrambling. For decades, markets had operated on a foundational belief: the United States would not weaponize its economic relationships against its closest allies. That belief had been built into every major financial instrument in the world: bond spreads, currency models, the entire architecture of international investment. That belief had just been shattered. The European Union moved with unusual speed. Within days, Brussels suspended the trade framework agreement it had reached with Washington just months earlier, not as a negotiating tactic, as a declaration. The terms of the relationship had fundamentally changed. Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was direct. Britain will not yield on our principles and values under threats of tariffs. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson was blunter. We will not let ourselves be blackmailed. But the resistance did not come only from overseas. In Washington, the response crossed party lines in ways that had become startlingly rare. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican, called the tariffs what they were: unnecessary, punitive, and a profound mistake. Senators Jeanne Shaheen and Tom Tillis, a Democrat and a Republican, released a joint statement. Continuing down this path is bad for America, bad for American businesses, and bad for American allies. This kind of rhetoric also further helps adversaries like Putin and Xi, who want to see NATO divided. The bipartisan nature of the criticism was not incidental. It was a signal that even within the president's own coalition, lines were being drawn. And one congressman drew the sharpest line of all. Republican Congressman Don Bacon made a statement that Washington insiders took very seriously. If Trump were to actually use military force on Greenland to invade a NATO ally, impeachment would follow immediately with Republican support.